Hello and welcome to the Washington Institute. I'm Rob Satloff, the Siegel Executive Director, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this policy forum that today will focus on one key front in the overall Middle East battlefield. Today we're focusing on Lebanon. Of course, there is a lot of action across the Middle East, both diplomatic and military, two sides of the same coin in the U.S. Iran conflict. Today, this panel is focusing on Lebanon, where there is enhanced Israeli retaliation against Hezbollah attacks, and there is the resumption of Lebanon-Israel negotiations tomorrow at the Pentagon, for the first time bringing high-ranking military officials of the two sides together in a military security track that will then complement the diplomatic track due to resume next week. Fighting and diplomacy, two sides of the reality in Lebanon today. We're going to look at all this with an outstanding panel of experts. Let me briefly introduce them. On my far left is David Schenker, former Assistant Secretary of State for Near East Affairs. Dave is the Taube Senior Fellow and Director of the Rubin Program on Arab Politics here at the Washington Institute. Sitting to his right is Brigadier General Asaf Orion, Reserve Officer in the Israel Defense Forces. He is our Reuven International Fellow here at the Institute. He served in his career, among other things, as the Chief Liaison Officer between Israel and Lebanon. And to my immediate left is Haneen Ghadar. Haneen is the Friedman Senior Fellow here at the Institute. She focuses on Shia politics with a special specialization on Hezbollah, and is the author of a fascinating work called Hezbollah Land, a look at the Shiite community within Lebanon. All right. So lots of issues just on the narrow topic of Lebanon. Asaf, let's begin with you, since the headlines of the day focus on Israeli military action inside Lebanon. What is the objective of what Israel is doing at the moment? What is the target? What's the goal? And how long do you think this is going to last?
Since it's great to be here. Since Hezbollah entered the war in October 2023, there was an ongoing fighting until a ceasefire in November 24. Then Hezbollah re-entered the war after Iran was attacked early March. So the current chapter is the last 2 months, so to speak. The main goal of Israel is to provide safety and security to its northern communities. That was the stated war goal from the beginning. And evidently, this has not been achieved. So what we're now seeing is that since early April, the government of Israel ordered the Israel Defense Forces to push away the threat from its borders, to create some kind of a security zone against the direct attacks, ground assaults, anti-tank guided missiles launches. So that's more or less the 8 to 10 kilometers deep. And the IDF indeed went in, started cleaning villages and places from Hezbollah's military assets, demolishing buildings which were used for military purposes, and establishing operational control all the way to the Litani. What the IDF met when they went there is Hezbollah resurgence as a guerrilla movement, and the special character or special threat in this chapter are drones, first-person view drones commanded by, controlled by optical fiber. And this means that the IDF is under constant fire, but also the northern communities. So the current phase is when in the last days, Israel ticked up in its level of attacks, something like 135 strikes by the IDF spokesperson only in the last 24 hours. Most of the attacks in southern Lebanon, some of them north of the Litani River, some warnings for population evacuation until the Zaharani River, so about 40 kilometers from Israel's border, including evacuation of the Nabatea area, that's a Shiite stronghold, and the Tyre area, a major urban area in the south. Some strikes in the Bekaa Valley and a single strike in Beirut. So Israel is trying, sorry, to remove the threat. Tactically, it's very difficult because those drones can fly up to 60 kilometers. So whatever you advance, you meet new people and you expose yourself to other people in the next ridge. And the governing restriction is actually constraints led or laid by President Trump because of Iran negotiation considerations. So Israel is, the public view in Israel is that our troops and civilians are exposed to Hezbollah fire. And at the same time, where our hands are tied from doing all that we wish. And that's mostly striking in Beirut against Hezbollah targets.
Okay, so if that's what the Israelis are doing currently inside Lebanon, Haneen, let's talk about Hezbollah. It had been targeted heavily by the Israelis, took a battering. Now, however, it seems to have found new means to attack effectively, not just in the security zone or the buffer zone, but even into Israel proper. And Hezbollah is threatening the government of Lebanon quite boldly and openly. What is going on with Hezbollah? What is motivating this? Who's making these decisions?
Thank you very much, Rob, and glad to be here with my colleagues. Before I answer your question directly, let me just explain the Hezbollah 2.0 version. Who is Hezbollah really today, and who's making these decisions, and what keeps Hezbollah going? How is this really, their power today in Lebanon is still intact despite all these destructions? Because simply after the last war, where their leader Hassan Nasrallah was killed and the top commander and the whole commander structure was eliminated, Hezbollah turned into a really very weak, barely functioning militia. So the IRGC, the Iranian regime, via the IRGC, decided that they need to be more hands-on with Hezbollah in Lebanon. So with many, it's like exactly what happened in the late 70s when they sent IRGC to Lebanon to form Hezbollah with the cooperation of Amal movement and the PLO. This is exactly the same as happening. They sent the hundreds of IRGC commanders to lead Hezbollah, reconstitute, rebuild Hezbollah with the same allies, which is the Amal movement under Nabih Berri, and instead of the PLO, the Shia militias in the region. This is really what constitutes Hezbollah. Without the IRGC commandment and without their allies in Lebanon, there's no Hezbollah. Let's be very clear. So the decisions today are made by the IRGC. It is no longer just Hezbollah referring to the IRGC for decisions. It's actually the IRGC leading the battle in Lebanon. So this is what's happening on the bigger picture. On the ground, what's really the issue is today is that while this is happening, how is Hezbollah or the IRGC capable of bringing in all the money needed and all the equipment needed to produce and reproduce all these drones and missiles and everything they need to continue attacking Israel, even on the cheap? Because simply the problem is really not just Hezbollah's arms. Even if you get rid of every single missile and drone and bullet of Hezbollah today, they will still have the capacity to rearm and to regenerate, simply because their power today is not just the arms that they are using, it's also their access within the security and financial and state institutions in Lebanon, and also because they are capable of smuggling in the equipment they need and the according to Treasury, at least 1 billion in 2025. So I can see, like how Iran is finding a way to get in money and arms to Hezbollah, whether from the airport or from Turkey or from Syria. That's a different question. But as long as a Lebanon policy does not really look at Hezbollah as an ecosystem with all this power, they will still be able to regenerate no matter what we do. So with their access to state institutions and the IRGC present in Lebanon, Hezbollah will continue to be strong. And it will be a vicious circle that will not be resolved with military action alone. It will have to be resolved like the sanctions that happened last week, U.S. sanctions on Hezbollah and their allies, enablers within the government, were a good message. We'll see what happens, but I think more should be done on that level.
So just to be clear, the decision by Hezbollah to attack Israel today, and the decision by Hezbollah to threaten the government of Lebanon, is this taken by Naim Qassem?
No.
Or is this taken by IRGC leaders in
IRGC leaders, 100%. I don't think Naim Qassem is capable of making any of these decisions. They are nothing today without the IRGC and their means and the state. They are threatening the state to maintain their control within the state. That's why they're threatening the state, because they need the state. And the IRGC today are the ones leading Hezbollah in Lebanon, trying to, they will need time to bring Hezbollah back to what they were, but they're not there yet.
Okay, I'm going to turn to my colleague Dave Shanker. Let me just mention that if you would like to get into this conversation, there are two ways to do it. You can pose a question at the Q&A function of your Zoom bar, or you can email us at policyforum, one word, policyforum @washingtoninstitute.org. All right, Dave, help disentangle the diplomacy that is going on, because as this fighting is happening, Israel and Lebanon are sitting down for peace talks. We're about to have a whole new round of them start tomorrow, security talks and then diplomatic talks. It's an odd diplomacy because these are two governments, but not necessarily the two combatants. And then there's a U.S. Iran diplomacy, which hovers above everything, and which may either complicate or resolve, perhaps both, what is going on between Israel and Lebanon. So help disentangle the diplomatic angle of this.
Well, thanks, Rob, and it's good to be here with my colleagues. Listen, you have what's going on. You have essentially these talks in Washington that are, do not have the combatants present, and Hezbollah is not present, but they are ever present above the talks. They are making their opinions known every day and playing a role in constraining the options of the government of Lebanon every day through threats, through actions on the ground, et cetera. And these talks have been now divided into two parts on the ground, with a separate military component at the Pentagon, and political talks at state or NSC. These will move forward. I think it's incredibly challenging on its own to figure out what the sequencing is here. Today is, or yesterday was the 26-year anniversary of Israel's unilateral withdrawal from Lebanon. Here we are 20 years later, or 26 years later, Hezbollah has now basically brought Israel back to another occupation. So the United States is working on that as one track, right? The Washington negotiations. Back with Trump and on a different level, you had these negotiations with Iran, and Iran has made very clear, as they did in the very beginning of the ceasefire negotiations, that Lebanon and indeed the whole axis of resistance, quote unquote, is an element of this ceasefire. That if there is going to be a wind down of the war between the United States and Israel and Iran, that this is going to have to include Lebanon. They haven't stated the other proxies, the Hashid or the Houthis. And the United States thus far has resisted the linkage. They've said so publicly that these issues are separate. But we did see early on the United States actually prevail on Israel to de-escalate in the ceasefire. And by de-escalation, basically drawing a red line, or let's say a yellow line, around Beirut and Dahia, that Israel would not strike there, and in fact, not really strike above Litani. At the same time, Secretary Rubio said very publicly, Israel has every right to respond not only to Hezbollah missiles, but to also prevent the launch of these missiles, which I think is opening the way for Israel to have more operational freedom. But I think ultimately Iran is going to stick to its guns on this issue of the proxies in Lebanon, and that is that they will want this included as part of the broader U.S. ceasefire or MOU or whatever we're calling it now in the Straits of Hormuz. And this is going to be a very thorny issue of what type of constraints the United States might try and impose on Israeli operational freedom in Lebanon. But at the end of the day, there will be almost certainly not only a bit of fighting, in Lebanon, but there will also be this continued Israeli presence there that is going to be an issue for the negotiations. They'll have to figure out, once again, the main issue will be sequencing. Lebanon has said fundamentally that their goal is ending the Israeli occupation of Lebanon, and Israel has said that the primary goal is ending basically the IRGC armed presence on its northern border, and that's going to be the crux of that key negotiation.
And it's tough to imagine that the government of Lebanon or the president of Lebanon wants Iran to be making a decision about the status of conflict in his country. This is, I can imagine that this would be very embarrassing.
It's a double-edged sword for the government of Lebanon, actually, because once again, they want nothing more than an end to the Israeli military presence in the south. And I think they would take that any way they could get it, whether with Iran's help at the negotiating table, with the U.S. putting pressure on Israel. Yes, it's a problem for the government of Lebanon. They're talking all the time about sovereignty. I believe they want sovereignty. But as Rubio said, at the end of the day, the government of Lebanon, the LAF, ultimately is going to have to do something about Hezbollah.
All right, so let's turn to that. The Lebanese Armed Forces, the security talks that are due to start tomorrow, Friday, here in Washington. What is the goal of these talks? What are the parameters of these talks? What could possibly be achieved in discussions between the military of Israel and the military of Lebanon? Are they focused on Hezbollah? Are they focused on Israel's deployment? What is the goal? Haneen, Asaf?
Okay. So obviously, the whole idea why this time we have two tracks instead of one is simply because the main hindrance, the main problem is Hezbollah's arms. We have seen since the ceasefire agreement that was signed in November 2024, a year and a half of relatively ceasefire with some Israeli attacks, and then the next round of conflict with some ceasefire or less fire, as they would like to call it. So this is something that a lot of time actually, where two things were very clear. One is that Hezbollah will never surrender their arms. It was very clear that Hezbollah is going to hold on. And as the discussion on Hezbollah's disarmament continues, Hezbollah is rebuilding actually their arms and gathering more arms. And the second thing that was very clear is that it's not just for the Lebanese Armed Forces and why they haven't done much in terms of disarmament. It's not just a matter of capacity. It's a political decision by the Lebanese government and president that they do not want to confront Hezbollah at all. They talk about civil war. Honestly, I don't believe this will be a civil war. I personally lived the civil war. Civil war is when people fight people and the state is weak. This time around, if the Lebanese Armed Forces has the political decision to go and disarm Hezbollah, then it will be a strong state decision versus an insurgency. That's not a civil war. But I think the whole talk about the civil war goes back to a much deeper fear, where the Lebanese government has still this, kind of trauma of the May 7 events of 2008, when the Bush administration back then told them to go ahead and go after Hezbollah's communication network and go after Hezbollah's presence in the airport, and they did it, and then they were abandoned. And no one did anything to help them. So there is a matter of trust. I think some reassurances, guarantees, some kind of reassurances to the Lebanese government that this time we will stick with you. You'll not be alone. That would go a long way. So the problem today is that I don't think this is the security talks that are separate from the political talks are going to address all that. I think it's just about where the army will start and what do they need to start.
All right. So Asaf, let me ask you even more specifically. Are the two sides coming together tomorrow to talk about a division of labor on how to counter and disarm Hezbollah? Are they coming to talk about the pace of Israeli redeployment and withdrawal? What, in your view, in your understanding, is the agenda for these security talks?
That's a great question. I think it's agendas in plural, or at least two of them. The IDF or Israel is coming for security and addressing Hezbollah's arms. That's the issue. Lebanon is coming to see when the IDF withdraws and how it can stop its strikes in Lebanon. Israel fights Hezbollah, but negotiates with Lebanon. Lebanon doesn't control what Hezbollah is shooting. That's the whole issue about the state sovereignty. Israel is determined to remove the threat to its residents and communities. Lebanon hasn't decided yet, and until now, they did some of the talks, but they walked only part of the walk, and some of it in collusion with Hezbollah. So I would guess that the IDF or Israel is coming distrusting, but willing to try again. But, fool me once, my bad. Fool me twice, even more my bad. So in this sense, I would say Israel would insist on disarmament of Hezbollah. It has some flexibility on pace and sequence and so on. I think the general principle in which the more the Lebanese do, and that's through diplomacy, the less the IDF would have to do. But we have this paradoxical issue. The more the IDF does, the more pressure is put on Hezbollah to reconsider the political path. So it's not only direct action, removing Hezbollah's missiles, killing its people, and pushing them away from Israel's border. It also applies pressure to Hezbollah, on Hezbollah, saying, unless you agree with your Lebanese colleagues, I'm your alternative, not keeping your arms. So it tries to shape the alternative space of Hezbollah while doing that. So two channels in this sense, trying to reinforce each other, the force itself employment, the military or security discussions. And a third element is the political discussion, because this is basically saying, Hezbollah, you maintain that the resistance will free Lebanon of Israel's withdrawal. We argue that a peace arrangement can provide for that, and we don't need your resistance. So that's the political and public aspect of this thrust.
There's another aspect to that, Saf, as well, which is the impact of these continued Israeli operations on the government of Lebanon's political support, ability to move forward, to do hard things. That's part of the discussion, right? I think sometimes it's overblown. The Lebanese government says, oh, we can't do this against Hezbollah while Israel is acting against Hezbollah. I think that's, a false choice. But it is also true that the government of Lebanon feels insecure. It's not only Hezbollah that's saying that they want to have a coup. It's that this government will have to take hard steps that 42% of the country doesn't necessarily agree with.
So it does seem to me that one of the key missing ingredients is confidence in the Lebanese government's commitment to disarm Hezbollah, let alone actually doing it, but even confidence of their commitment to do it.
Yeah, we're still there from day one.
We're still there.
Right. November 2024, there was a ceasefire signed between Israel and Lebanon, and the government of Lebanon committed within that ceasefire to disarm Hezbollah. It agreed to disarm Hezbollah south of the Litani and north of the Litani. They did I don't want to say credible. They made a bit of an effort in the south. And we have to remember this was with Hezbollah's acquiescence. So Hezbollah said, hey, the LAF, the Lebanese Armed Forces, you can come and take some of our weapons. They did some of it that was largely reactive, not proactive. They didn't generate any of their own intelligence. They were tasked essentially by Israel, which provided the intelligence to the U.S.-led mechanism, and they went and collected. Great. They declared victory, and then they were supposed to move on to the next step. Putting aside, that they didn't really complete the job in the South, the army, the LAF balked. They wouldn't move further. They said, we have to discuss this more. We need consensus. We don't want to have conflict or confrontation with Hezbollah. And the primary goal of the LAF is not disarming Hezbollah or implementing state sovereignty. It is protecting and preserving the Lebanese Armed Forces. And so I think there still is this question about whether the government of Lebanon will move forward with really difficult decision here.
All right. So there are a couple of questions that are provoked by these remarks. First, Haneen, what is your response to the argument about consensus that Lebanon is an unusual country with sectarian differences, with a decades experience of civil conflict, that to make national decisions like this, everybody needs to be aboard, and the government has yet to find a way to convince the large Shia community to support this effort. And until that happens, it would be foolish to take a strong stand against Hezbollah. That's the argument that one hears. What is your response to that?
It's a virus. National consensus has always been a virus that keeps Lebanon sick. Because every time when you talk about national consensus with one party armed and threatening the others, that's not national consensus. That is surrendering to the party that is armed, which is, in this case, Hezbollah. We have many examples in the recent history of national consensus, national, like how the Doha Agreement. After, like the May 7 events of 2008, Hezbollah benefited so much from that national consensus meeting. Every time in Lebanon we talk about national consensus, the actual translation of that is Hezbollah's interests. That's basically what it means. And it's a virus that needs to be treated, because today this is basically Hezbollah works for Hezbollah's benefits, but also it's not constitutional. The constitution in Lebanon is a democracy constitutionally. So there is a parliament, there is a government, and we know exactly how it works. It's not based on national consensus, it's based on numbers and votes. So we should actually implement, the constitution, work with the constitution. National consensus came after the civil war, but especially with Hezbollah's arms. So this is something that we need to reject. And today, especially if we talk about the talks and how these talks are working, every time you hear the word national consensus, it means that the Lebanese have to go back to Berri, per se, who is representing Hezbollah today, and asking for his permission. That's what national consensus means today. So no, I would rather go to the Constitution and do things exactly as the Constitution stipulates. And if those who don't like it will live with it, it's okay. They will forget about it tomorrow and move on.
Okay, so in your view, national consensus is actually just a code word for being deferential to Hezbollah.
Correct.
All right. Asaf, you earlier made a remark in passing about how Hezbollah actually cooperated. Maybe it was you, Dave. Hezbollah cooperated with the LAF in the practical implementation of disarmament south of the Litani in late 2025, before the current war began. Last week, the United States implemented sanctions against a range of Lebanese actors, some political, some economic, some military, including against a major Lebanese army official and a major Lebanese security official. This is a pretty bold statement. So, Dave, I know you've had a lot of experience dealing with sanctions in the U.S. government in Lebanon. How do you interpret what the U.S. government is saying in these sanctions? And I'd like to ask all the panel, what do you think the impact is inside Lebanon by these sanctions?
Yeah, well, listen, I think it was great that the United States rolled out these 9 sanctions. I think there were, the handful of sort of the usual suspects, Hezbollah members of parliament. They threw in a couple Amal members who are militiamen who work for Nabi Berri. That's the Speaker of Parliament. That's a nice symbolic. But the most meaningful aspect that you just touched on were the 2 security officials. One is somebody in general security who has a role in had a role in sharing intelligence with Hezbollah. The other, a colonel in military intelligence. And this is a shot across the bow of the Lebanese Armed Forces. And I don't want to forget, but there's an issue here about ultimately the president of Lebanon actually advocating ultimately for Hezbollah to be incorporated into the Lebanese Armed Forces as a potential solution. That's a bad idea. The Lebanese Armed Forces already has a problem with infiltration, collaboration, coordination, deconfliction over the years, even as the United States has provided something like $2-3 billion to the Lebanese Armed Forces since 2005. This organization, it has people who are sympathetic, who are members, who swear their allegiance to the Wilayat al-Faqih in Tehran. And they're not going to do the job, or they're going to undermine what's going on with the LAF, or the difficult task that someday this organization may embrace. And I think for this administration, I think this was a great step, because they're putting the Lebanese Armed Forces on notice. Lebanese Armed Forces describe themselves as a quote unquote national institution, as the only national institution. It can't be a national institution and be loyal to Hezbollah. It has to be loyal to the state. And in fact, sooner or later is going to have to start obeying the orders given to it by the government, the democratically elected government of Lebanon, rather than making decisions on their own. I think this was a brilliant stroke. And I think actually it's important that the United States government stay on top of this, start collecting more detailed information. Obviously, the United States government talks to Israel, and start picking out people, either designating them or telling the Lebanese Armed Forces to either retire these people, give them their pensions, put them on a farm, get them out of key positions, because this organization is not going to be able to assist the government in asserting sovereignty over this country if it's full of brimming with Hezbollah loyalists.
So, Haneen, what was the political reverberation inside Lebanon from the announcement of the U.S. sanctions?
Many Lebanese obviously were very excited about it because, as David said, it was a great list, right? So don't forget that this is the first actually list of sanctions done by this Trump administration. So it was like overdue, if you want, or long due. It hit where it needed to hit. People got the message. Obviously, we don't know. It's too early to tell whether they worked or not. But if you think about sanctions as a tool, not as policy, it means that this should be followed up, and I hope it's followed up with a list of demands and clear messaging in terms like what is really the message behind these sanctions and what is required from the Lebanese Armed Forces, the General Security, Berri per se, because the two Amal guys that were sanctioned are very, very close to his security circles. This needs to be followed up with clear messaging and demands, and tightening the sanctions, more sanctions if people did not respond well, right? So it has to come with a basket of sticks and carrots, because like sanctions are a tool, but also if you come and say Lebanon has to do this 1, 2, 3, they will get X, Y, and Z if all is good, but also they will get there will be consequences. So it's good, generally speaking. The most important thing really here is that it's not just the Lebanese Armed Forces. I'd like to mention that the General Security today, specifically in Lebanon, this sanctions was perceived, maybe it's not linked, but the General Security has been a very nasty tool in the hands of Hezbollah.
This is the Lebanese equivalent of what is otherwise known as the mukhabarat around the Middle East.
Internal, if you want.
Security.
They're in charge of points of entries, the airports, the passports. And for Lebanon, there was actually like a big story going on about how the former head of the General Security was forging hundreds, if not thousands, of passports, actual passports, Lebanese passports, to the Iranians, IRGC people, to come to Lebanon and do what they're doing as with their fake Lebanese passports. This is what General Security did. So it has been a very nasty tool for Hezbollah more than anything else. So that was seen as a very good step in Lebanon.
And so, Asaf, when Israeli officers sit across a table from Lebanese officers, is this a discussion? Is this part of the discussion, or do you leave this for the U.S. to deal with in U.S.-Lebanese contacts?
Well, I spent about 10 years on and off, including leading the IDF delegations to the talks with the Lebanese Armed Forces. Usually, the IDF came with a no bullshit approach and well documented. In this place, in this day, on this date, this so and so happened, and these are the facts, and here are the visuals providing that. Usually, the Lebanese have another explanations. This is not proven. We will check. This hasn't happened. So this armed guy is a bird hunter. and many stories. I think generally the Lebanese are following the playbook. Make promises, make some movements, do not deliver, claim that you have difficulties and restraints and constraints and capacity problems and capability problems, and you don't have fuel and so and civil war, and they bide time and pray for the continuation of U.S. and foreign aid. So there's constant meetings of the conferences of the Friends of the Lebanese Armed Forces and so on. We need to break out of this pattern. It needs to be a truthful discussion of what really happens on the ground, what the IDF forces discover in South Lebanon, south of the Litani, where the Lebanese Armed Forces claimed the mission accomplished, is breathtaking. The amount of weapons there is huge. So somebody either didn't do his job or lied about it. So the collusion is part of the explanation. As Hanin said, the Lebanese Armed Forces has to be purged from collaborators and infiltrators and turncoats and so on. And we have like an alternative between continuing this fighting, which will not put an end to the problem, but only devour more and more of Lebanon, and with Israeli casualties and prices, or try to get more on the diplomacy side, which means that Lebanon takes the responsibility to address it, to start dealing with places where the IDF is not there, and down the road, accepting or receiving responsibility for areas which the IDF cleared, holds, and will hand over to their authority.
All right, so we have a number of questions that have already come in. Again, if you want to get into our conversation, either pose a question in the Q&A function of your Zoom bar, or send an email to policyforum@washingtoninstitute.org. Now, one question, very interesting question. If there is a debate over national consensus in targeting Hezbollah, there really shouldn't be a debate over targeting the IRGC officers that are in Lebanon supporting Hezbollah. Why is it so difficult for Lebanon at least to implement government decisions to expel IRGC officers from Lebanon who are engaging in prescribed illegal activity? Who is arguing against this?
No one is arguing against this, but it all boils down to, again, the simple question of why don't we still have a political decision to implement the government's decisions regarding the expelling the Iranian ambassador, expelling the IRGC officers from Lebanon, and disarming Hezbollah? This is all linked to one thing, which is a political decision to go ahead and implement the decisions, the actual decisions of the Haida. There are a lot of talk in Lebanon about doing what needs to be done and making all these great sovereign decisions, but on the ground, it's not the capacity. The decision today is that do what you can, but do not confront Hezbollah. Confrontation with Hezbollah is still a big no on all levels.
That extends to not just confronting Hezbollah, but extends to confronting.
What is
the
Hezbollah?
Hezbollah is the IRGC.
Exactly. What is
Hezbollah, right? This could potentially provoke a direct confrontation with the organization. I mean, it may be that the government of Lebanon doesn't know who these people are. After all, they're carrying Lebanese passports. But yes, the government of Lebanon could make the decision to send the general security or the LAF and surround the Iranian ambassador's house, turn off his electricity and his internet, and pull Emmanuel Noriega on him, right? Blast heavy metal music for a week until he leaves. But this too, they fear confrontation with Hezbollah. And, I have to say, this is explainable. I don't blame them, right? Between 2005, when Hezbollah murdered Rafiq Hariri, and 2018, they murdered 25 Lebanese journalists, politicians, civil society activists, some of them, good friends of all of us here, Mohammed Shatta, Lokman Saleem, et cetera. They have a track record. They say they're going to topple the government. I believe that if they could, they would topple the government. They say they're going to start the killing machine again. I think there's good reason to believe that unless the Lebanese government takes steps to prevent that, they will do it.
Basically, I think we need to recognize that Lebanon is under Iranian occupation. And from there, all the other tactical details.
I agree. Lebanon is definitely under Iranian occupation today. A lot of people were trying to avoid this statement because, the Hezbollah are Lebanese people. But here you go, IRGC have Lebanese passports now. So it is an Iranian occupation, and it's not Iranian occupation by proxy. It is actual direct Iranian occupation today. The fear that David is mentioning about assassination and about toppling the government is real. They are afraid. But honestly, I think we need to get above and beyond this fear and actually confront the Iranian occupation the way we confronted the Syrian occupation. However, again, we go back to how it works. In 2005, when the Lebanese people confronted the Syrian occupation, that was made possible because back then the U.S. was all in supporting the Lebanese people. David was in government back then, so it was very clear that the Americans were with the Lebanese people in confronting this occupation. We need outside and inside to work together in order to do that.
So what do you think, David, is missing from the U.S. approach that would provide the confidence to the Lebanese government to do what Haneen is suggesting?
Listen, I'm hesitant to give the government of Lebanon money, right? This is a government that's unreformed, a very promising government. But listen, there's no guarantee, right? The United States is not putting boots on the ground aside from some monitors, mechanism, et cetera. We're not going to provide, I doubt that the CIA is going to protect the leadership of the government of Lebanon. But there are things we can do in terms of laying out the roadmap and actually making it clear to Lebanese people. The United States is willing to do this. We are willing to get you out of your financial crisis. We are willing to get the Israelis out of Lebanon if you take these steps and lay out the roadmap for them. Lay it on the table. Let Hezbollah say, no, we don't want that. We'd rather be occupied because that's our raison d'etre, right? We're resistance and we serve the government of Iran. Therefore, we permanently want Israeli occupation. Let them say that and let the Lebanese people see what the United States can bring to the table, right? Aid, investment, outfitting the LAF even more if they what they need, facilitating better relations with their Syrian neighbors, getting Israeli gas in there. I mean, there's all kinds of things that the United States can bring, and I think laying it out, but it's not going to be boots on the ground. We're not going.
Can I just add one little thing to this? Is that currently it's vital if we really want to talk about U.S. helping Lebanon with dealing with the Iranian occupation, is delinking Lebanon from the talks with Iran. Lebanon should not be part of any deal or arrangement or memorandum of understanding with Iran. It should be dealt with separately as a sovereign state, and that's how you contain and address the Iranian occupation of Lebanon.
Okay, I have a number of questions. I'm going to try to get to them in the time that we have left. Asaf, for you, we've spoken quite a bit about Lebanese domestic politics and its impact on how the Lebanese government is or isn't able to address the issue of Hezbollah. Israel is not without its own domestic politics. And while the security aspects are very real, there are other forces at play, at least this questioner posits. What is the domestic political angle of the Lebanon issue inside Israel?
I think it's a combination of anxiety and frustration about the threat to the northern communities still there after all this time. There's a sense of resentment to the government not providing, not achieving its own defined war goal. There are accusations against the IDF, which does not solve the problem. And there is a great pain for the lost soldiers every day or two. We lose a soldier, or we even have casualties among civilians. So you won't find, I think, in Israel many who call for an immediate stop before this is solved. And on the contrary, it's a sense of get it over and done with, get the job done. They don't really define what it means, but I think the general feeling is that it needs to be solved. Only ironically, Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Minister of Defense Katz promised before this campaign that it will change the situation in Lebanon once and for all. I think it's a good answer or it reflects the general public emotion, but it's very far from being a strategic, military professionally true, or even possible.
I mean, without the Lebanese government playing its role, it's difficult to see how one resolves this problem once and for all.
Once and for all is difficult because the problem begins with a Lebanese weakness in which foreign elements fester, threaten Israel, and drawing it in. Unless you break this circle, you find yourself again and again in the same washing machine.
It's hard to imagine Israel doing much or making any concession publicly anyway before elections. Right. This is we see statements from Israeli ministers about what they're going to do in Lebanon for every drone that lands in Israel. This has become an electoral issue as well.
I mean, I can imagine there being a difference between Israeli military action and Israeli deployment in South Lebanon. I mean, even if Hezbollah, for example, were to stop all attacks tomorrow, 100%, you might have a significant decrease in Israeli retaliatory action, but the Israelis aren't leaving southern Lebanon. Is that
until
correct?
Hezbollah is dismantled?
Until we see that.
Israel has, I think, flexibility in assigning forces to stationary missions in Lebanon. It can well choose to raid places, come, do whatever you need, leave. You can do standoff and so on. There'll be a tension between Israel's current new doctrine of enforcing the no reconstitution or rearming and so on, and the fact that Hezbollah will retaliate if Israel continues. So there will be a question of Israel's right to self-defense, on its prevention doctrine right now, and the ability to calm the border down and hold the discussion in parallel.
Just to conclude this little piece of the discussion, in Israeli domestic politics, is there another big idea? I mean, does the opposition, do any of the other major political actors, former general, head of the opposition, or leader of the opposition, Gadi Eisenkot or Yair Golan or whatever, is there another big idea about how to deal with Lebanon?
I think the understanding is that you need to combine diplomacy and military, and not to just promise military victories and total victory.
Okay. Question from viewers. The role of other countries So far we've spoken about the United States, Lebanon, Israel, a little bit about Iran. Do other countries play a role in this dynamic, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, the most interesting development of late has been Saudi re-engagement on Lebanon. They've been absent. I think Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, sort of washed his hands of this issue. He didn't have the same sentimental attachment to Lebanon as his father, the king, did, and didn't see the Hariris as a good investment anymore. And Saudi really played no role for, when I say a decade, better part of a decade. Now they're back, right? Diplomatically, you've got calls between the president and Mohammed bin Salman. You've got Nabi Berri's sanctioned deputies going to the deputy that I sanctioned, going to Riyadh to meet Faisal bin Farhan and talk about Shiite politics. The all sorts of engagement, and I think the United States has been very clear that the Saudis are now playing a more positive role, and they like it. Me personally, I think there's some downsides to this as well, because the Saudis have come in and said, well, it's okay that Lebanon talk directly to Israel, but you have to abide by the Arab Peace Initiative, which means Palestinian statehood comes first. So there's some question about the productivity of that, and how far that Lebanon and Israel can go. Another country, Turkey, looking for inroads. They've been doing this for years. The northern sort of impoverished areas of Akkar in northern Lebanon. If you go there, you'll see posters of Erdogan, the president of Turkey. They're delivering 360 tons of humanitarian goods to Lebanon. They've got their international humanitarian relief organizations going in, trying to work their foothold in Sunni areas up in Tripoli, et cetera. They have ambitions for Lebanon long term. Less significant, I think, the Qataris, always, I think, a concern, particularly for Israel, but also other Lebanese, about the Muslim Brotherhood influence. They pledged money for the reconstruction of Lebanon, I think $480 million. I don't see them having a huge diplomatic role there right now, but there's some involvement.
Are the Saudis coming with money or just with
no money, diplomacy? The Saudis have long held out that they threw a lot of good money after bad in Lebanon, and they, like the United States, like we did during the first Trump administration, said, "Yeah, we'll give you money, but you gotta reform. You got to fight some of this corruption. Lebanon's been a black hole, right? You got a man-made financial crisis. Why are we going to, Saudi says it very publicly, we're not the ATM of the Arab world anymore."
Haneen, we've spoken so far. We spent the hour mostly about the security talks and the Hezbollah angle. Next week, they're going to resume talks on peace between Israel and Lebanon. Is this surreal? Is there a reasonable goal that can be achieved? What do you expect to happen in these negotiations?
It's not surreal. The whole talk started as peace talks, and now they're separating them into security and peace talks because they realize that the elephant is in the room is Hezbollah's arms, and it has to be dealt with separately. But the peace talks will continue, and they have to continue, because simply you need a parallel political track besides in parallel to the security track that deals with Hezbollah's arms, which means these peace agreement is not just to sign a peace and or Abraham Accords or normalization, whatever it is, and just put it on a shelf. It involves a lot of work, including the border demarcation, which is not very difficult to achieve, including security agreements, but also trade agreements, economic agreements, all of that. They can reach it, and then it will be implemented as soon as the Hezbollah's arms are
you mean it's part of what David said? Show what is possible,
It's important, very important, because it will play a great, it will influence the narrative in Lebanon. First, it will show the Lebanese people what is possible, but also take away from Hezbollah's resistance narrative to show that, you know, like Lebanon and Israel can reach an agreement with border demarcation where resistance is no longer valid because there's no land to free anymore. We agreed on everything. You still have to resolve the Sheba thing with the Syrians, get the Syrians to say that Sheba is Syrian and get it over with. And the rest is easy, but it will influence the narrative, the public opinion, and definitely show what's possible. And practically, it will be ready to implement as soon as Hezbollah's arms are dealt with.
Okay, so before we conclude, we have to come full circle and remind everyone that, of course, this entire conversation occurs within the context of the U.S. Iran diplomacy. So let me ask, what does happen if there is a U.S. Iran interim agreement? It's really an extension of a ceasefire with a promise to talk more about certain issues. But let's assume for a moment that there is a line in there about ceasefire in Lebanon. What impact would that have on this diplomacy and on the Lebanon front? Asaf, I'll start with you.
I think it will put Hezbollah in an interesting spot because they can't insist on continuing to strike Israel under when Iran says you need to be quiet because I have a deal to work with. The flip side of that is that it will be difficult to continue fighting when Hormuz is on the line. So if fighting in Lebanon leads to closing Hormuz or to difficulties in the U.S.-Iran negotiations, this is the problem with the linkage. So there might be potential there for a bit of de-escalation and toning down the friction. Definitely from the Hezbollah side, Israel will need to adjust. I don't see a political problem in continuing the negotiations, but we need to hold our hopes, on a realistic level. It won't be peace now. It won't be peace tomorrow, but it's a step in the right direction.
Haneen?
Politically speaking, from a Lebanon's perspective, just like linking Hezbollah, linking Lebanon to this any kind of agreement is one acknowledging, basically saying it's okay that the IRGC now are in charge of Lebanon. It will give Hezbollah a big political boost because when part of this agreement was leaked or mentioned 2 weeks ago, Hezbollah got a political boost before even reaching an agreement. They will, one way or another, translate this into a victory in Lebanon. And they will promise people, any sanctions relief, any money coming from to Iran will come to Hezbollah, and they will benefit from it. Unfortunately, there should be a way of delinking Lebanon from this agreement and making sure that the Lebanese deal with their issues separately from Iran without giving Hezbollah a political boost.
Okay, and Dave.
Two things, Rob. One is I think that if there is some sort of linkage, that this will also put a lot of pressure or constraints on Israel on preemption. We saw during the last ceasefire de-escalation that Hezbollah was spending $50 million, $100 million a month on reconstituting their military. That's not going to be helpful if they're able to do this without being have consequences. Second, when the war was launched, I was with a whole bunch of Lebanese in another country, and they had champagne at breakfast because they thought this was going to be the end of the Iranian regime and that this was going to be a real setback for Hezbollah in Lebanon. I think an agreement is necessarily going to take some of the wind out of the sails of Hezbollah's opponents in Lebanon. I hope that this doesn't result in demoralization of folks who have worked so hard to change the status quo in the country.
Okay, well, on that sobering note, I want to thank all three of you for this intensive focus on the Lebanese-Israel track and the Lebanese-Israel conflict, or more precisely, the Hezbollah-Israel conflict that is being negotiated between the government of Lebanon and the state of Israel. Follow the work of all three of these scholars if you want to get day-by-day updates on what is the situation on this front. And more generally, please follow the work of the Washington Institute at www.washingtoninstitute.org for all aspects of the broader U.S. Iran conflict and U.S. Middle East policy. Thank you very much for joining us at today's Policy Forum. Bye-bye.